Dad's silent revenge.
The whiskey glass hit my temple with enough force to split skin. Blood dripped onto my white collar as Norman stood there, swaying drunk, pointing at me like I was his hired help. Servants must obey their masters, he slurred. That's when I knew 8 months of patience had bought me nothing but this moment, a drunk man's contempt in my own home. My name is Harold Peterson, I'm 65 years old, and I spent 30 years investigating insurance fraud before I retired. I thought I'd seen every kind of scam, but I never expected to find one sitting at my own dinner table. It started 8 months ago when my daughter Beverly called, voice tight with embarrassment. Could she and Norman stay with me temporarily while he transitioned between sales jobs? Just a few weeks, she promised. They'd been married 3 years, and this wasn't the first time Norman had lost a position. I'd been rattling around in this big house alone since my wife Martha passed 2 years ago, so I said yes. Family helps family, right? Wrong. The first month was tolerable. Norman worked his sales routes, came home tired, kept mostly to himself. Beverly helped around the house, cooked dinner sometimes, tried to bridge the gap between her husband and her father, but by month 2, I started noticing things. The way Norman looked at my furniture like he was appraising it, how he'd comment on the neighborhood property values, little remarks about when this place needs updating or if I owned a house like this. Month 3 brought the drinking. Not alcoholism exactly, but a pattern. Norman would pour himself whiskey after dinner and sit in my living room complaining about his boss, his clients, the unfairness of his commission structure. The complaints grew louder as the glass emptied. Beverly would try to steer him upstairs, but he'd wave her off. I'm talking to Harold, he'd say, though it was more like talking at me. By month 4, Norman had been laid off again. Restructuring, he called it, though. Beverly later admitted they'd cited his performance issues. That's when the real entitlement began. Norman started sleeping until 10, spending his days on my couch, treating job hunting like a part-time hobby. When I'd suggest he might want to expand his search or consider other industries, he'd get defensive. Easy for you to say, Harold, you're retired. No pressure. No bills hanging over your head, but I did have bills. Property taxes on this house ran $6,800 a year. Utilities, maintenance, insurance, retirement wasn't free. Norman seemed to think my money was as available to him as my refrigerator. Month 5 brought the first real confrontation. I'd found Norman in my home office, sitting at my desk, going through my financial papers. Bank statements, investment portfolios, insurance policies scattered across the oak surface like he was conducting an audit. What are you doing? I asked from the doorway. He looked up without embarrassment. Just trying to understand the household finances. See what we're working with here. Well, yeah. Beverly and I are family now. We should know where we stand financially. I walked over, gathered my papers, and placed them in my desk drawer. Locked it. You stand financially wherever your own bank account puts you. My finances are my business. That's when his face changed. A flash of something ugly before he caught himself and forced a smile. Sure, Harold, I get it. Just trying to be helpful, but I knew what I'd seen. Norman wasn't viewing me as Beverly's father anymore. He was viewing me as an obstacle between him and my assets. The pattern accelerated through months 6 and 7. Norman would make comments about my old-fashioned way of managing money, suggest I should set up joint accounts for convenience, mention how Beverly worried about my health living alone in such a big house. The subtext was clear. I was getting older, less capable, and they were positioning themselves as my caretakers and inheritors. Beverly seemed oblivious to the manipulation. When I'd try to discuss Norman's behavior with her, she'd defend him. He's just trying to help, Dad. He feels bad about staying here so long, but I could see the stress wearing on her too, dark circles under her eyes. The way she jumped when Norman raised his voice. How she'd apologize for him constantly. Month 8 started with Norman landing another sales position, and for a few weeks, things improved. He was out of the house during the day, bringing home paychecks, talking about moving out soon. But the whiskey consumption increased. Norman would celebrate good days with drinks and medicate bad days with more drinks. Either way, my living room became his personal bar every evening. Which brings us to that Tuesday night in March when everything changed. Norman had been drinking since he walked in the door at 5:30. His sales call hadn't gone well, something about a client questioning his numbers. By dinner time, he'd worked through half a bottle of Jameson. Beverly tried to get him to eat, but he was more interested in the bottle than her pot roast. Pass the whiskey, Harold, he said during dinner, not bothering to say please. I gestured toward the sideboard behind him. It's right there, Norman. He looked at me like I'd personally insulted him. I asked you to pass it, and I'm telling you where it is. That's when his face flushed red, and he leaned forward across my dining table, the same table where Martha and I had shared 25 years of meals. You know what your problem is, Harold? You sit in this house all day doing nothing while people like me work for a living. Least you can do is show some respect. Beverly tried to intervene. "Norman, please. Dad's been generous letting us stay here," but Norman was beyond reason. He stood up, swaying slightly, pointing his empty glass at me like a weapon. "Generous, he's got $1 million house and more money than he can spend. We're doing him a favor, keeping him company." I stood up slowly, feeling 30 years of courtroom composure settling over me like armor. "There are no servants in this house, Norman. You're a guest here. You might want to remember that." That's when he threw the glass. The crystal caught me right on the temple. Pain exploded across the side of my face as whiskey sprayed everywhere and ice cubes scattered across my hardwood floor. Beverly gasped and jumped up from her chair. Norman stood there looking shocked at what he'd done, like his own hand had betrayed him. I touched my temple and felt the warm blood. Looked at my fingers, red and sticky. Then I looked at Norman, really looked at him, and made a decision that would change everything. Get him out of my sight. I told Beverly, my voice deadly calm. She was crying now, trying to push Norman toward the stairs. "Oh my God, Norman, what did you do, Dad? I'm so sorry, he didn't mean it." Norman stumbled, drunk, and suddenly realizing he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. "It was an accident," he mumbled. "I didn't mean to actually hit him." They disappeared upstairs. A door slammed. Then silence fell over my house like a heavy blanket. I walked to the bathroom and examined the damage in the mirror. 2-inch cut along my hairline, deep enough to bleed freely, but not requiring stitches. Bruising was already starting to spread like purple watercolor. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures, date stamped, March 28, 2024, 8:47 p.m. evidence. See, most people would have called the cops right then. But 30 years investigating fraud taught me something valuable. Emotion makes you sloppy. You want to nail someone, you build a case first. I cleaned the wound carefully, applied antiseptic, covered it with a bandage. Then I went back to the dining room and photographed everything. The shattered glass on the floor, the whiskey stain on the wall where it had splattered, my blood-stained shirt. I collected the larger glass fragments in a plastic bag, left the rest untouched. Chain of evidence, just like the old days. I didn't sleep that night. Sat in my office chair thinking about that moment when Norman called me a servant, the entitlement in his voice. Like my house, my hospitality, my dead wife's memory meant nothing. Around 3 a.m., I started making a list of everything I knew about Norman Walsh. Married to Beverly 3 years, lost at least 3 jobs in that time, drank too much, had been going through my personal papers, made comments about property values and inheritance, and now he'd committed assault in my own home. But there was more to uncover, had to be. Norman's behavior patterns suggested someone with hidden problems, hidden debts, hidden desperation. In my experience, people don't get this brazenly entitled without serious financial pressure driving them. Morning came and I was ready. Called Scottsdale PD at 6:30 a.m. "I'd like to report an assault that occurred in my home last night. The perpetrator is still on the premises. I have photographic evidence and I'm ready to provide a full statement." 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes, Officer Martinez and Officer Johnson, both professional and thorough. I led them through my house like I was presenting a case to a jury, the dining room where it happened. Glass fragments I'd deliberately left on the floor. My blood-stained shirt draped over a chair. The bag of collected evidence. They photographed everything while I gave my statement. Clear, factual, no emotion, just like testifying in court. I described the 8-month progression of Norman's behavior, the escalating entitlement, his access to my financial papers, his comments about inheritance. Painted a picture of a man who'd moved from guest to predator. When they went upstairs to arrest Norman, I heard him protesting through the ceiling. "This is ridiculous. It was an accident. Harold's overreacting. You're seriously calling cops on family?" I heard Beverly crying, trying to explain, trying to minimize, but the evidence spoke louder than her apologies. I watched through my living room window as they put him in the patrol car. Norman in handcuffs, trying to turn around to look at the house, probably calculating how much this was going to cost him. Beverly followed them outside in her bathrobe, still trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed. The patrol car pulled away. No lights, no sirens, just routine transport of someone who'd committed a crime, but arresting Norman was just the beginning. While he spent 26 hours in Maricopa County Jail, I was busy. Filed for a protective order that morning at the courthouse, showed Judge Patricia Williams my photos, medical documentation, police report. She signed it without hesitation. 100-yard minimum distance from petitioner and his residence, effective immediately, enforceable by law, she said, her pen scratching across official paper. That's when I made the call that would really change things. Robert Martinez, private investigator, I'd worked with him on a dozen insurance fraud cases over the years. Solid guy, thorough, discreet. "Harold, good to hear from you. Retirement treating you well? It was until my son-in-law assaulted me in my own home last night. Robert, I want you to investigate this man. Everything. Finances, employment history, debts, assets, criminal background. I want to know what's driving his behavior. Personal case, huh? How deep you want me to dig, all the way down to bedrock. And Robert, bill me at your premium rate. I want this done right, you got it. Give me his full name, SSN if you have it, and any background details. While Norman was being processed out of jail the next afternoon, a court clerk was waiting in the parking lot with a clipboard. Standard procedure for emergency protective orders. They serve you the moment you're released. Beverly later told me Norman's face went white when he read the papers. This is my home, he'd said. He can't kick me out of my own home, but it wasn't his home. It was mine. It had always been mine. And now the law agreed. They spent that afternoon apartment hunting in Norman's beat-up Honda, Beverly driving while Norman scrolled through rental listings on her phone. His range had grown severely limited, background checks were going to show an assault conviction now, and most decent landlords would pass. They settled on a rundown complex off Indian School Road. Ground floor unit, thin walls, parking lot that smelled like hot asphalt and broken dreams. The leasing agent, a tired woman with processed hair, sensed their desperation immediately. Credit check will take 48 hours, she said, looking at Norman's application like it might contain a communicable disease. I'm employed, Norman said quickly, though his voice lacked conviction. Your score is showing some issues. Both of you will need to sign as co-signers. Full liability if there are problems. Beverly spoke up. We understand. They signed a 1-year lease that afternoon. $4,400 a month for a 600-square-foot box with no dishwasher and questionable plumbing, from my 2,800-square-foot house in North Scottsdale to this. The fall had been swift and steep. 3 weeks later, Robert's investigation report arrived in my email inbox. 47 pages that painted a picture I should have seen coming, but the details were worse than I'd imagined. Norman had $32,000 in credit card debt spread across 7 different cards. His sales performance had been declining for over a year. Commission reports showed a 60% drop from his previous year's earnings. Customer complaints were mounting. His most recent performance review, which Robert had somehow obtained, used phrases like hostile attitude and unprofessional conduct with clients. But page 23 made my blood run cold. Bank statements from Beverly's retirement account, going back 4 months, 4 separate withdrawals, $3,200 in November, $3,800 in January, and $20,800 in February, total. $12,500 taken while they lived rent-free in my house, eating meals I'd paid for. I traced my finger down the dates. November, right after Norman lost his previous job. December, when he'd complained about holiday expenses. January, after his worst sales month. February, 2 weeks before he threw the glass at me. He'd been systematically draining Beverly's future while sitting at my dinner table. The final section of Robert's report was the most damaging. He'd interviewed 3 of Norman's former co-workers under the pretense of a reference check. Their statements, typed and notarized, contained direct quotes that made my hands shake. Norman said the old man wouldn't last much longer. Said he was inheriting a house worth close to $500,000 soon, talked about it like guaranteed money. Another co-worker, he called it his retirement strategy. Move in with the father-in-law, wait it out, inherit everything. Those were his exact words. The third statement was the shortest but sharpest. Norman joked that nursing homes were expensive, said his father-in-law wouldn't waste money on one when he had free live-in care. We all knew he meant himself and his wife. I set the papers down carefully as if they might combust. Norman hadn't moved into my home because Beverly asked or because he'd fallen on hard times. He'd moved in because he saw me as an asset to liquidate. Not a father-in-law, not family, a real estate investment with an expiration date. That afternoon I drove to Patricia Reeves' law office. Patricia had handled Martha's will and my estate planning for 15 years. Sharp woman, early 60s, who'd seen enough family drama to sink a battleship. Harold, this conditional clause you want is highly unusual, she said, reviewing my handwritten notes. Your daughter inherits everything only if she's legally divorced from Norman Walsh. If she remains married, the entire estate goes to charity. That's going to cause serious family conflict. That's exactly the point, Patricia. She chooses him, she chooses poverty. She chooses herself, she gets security. Her decision. Patricia studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're well within your rights. Let me draft this properly. It took 90 minutes to formalize everything. The conditional inheritance was ironclad. Beverly received the house, my retirement accounts, and all remaining assets only if legally divorced from Norman Walsh before my death. Otherwise, everything went to the Arizona Coalition Against Domestic Violence. This is now legally binding, Patricia said, placing the document in a fireproof envelope. Would you like me to notify Beverly? Not directly. Send her a certified letter. Keep it vague but concerning. Estate planning documents have been updated. Conditional terms now apply to inheritance. Consult your attorney for implications. When do you want this sent today? She should receive it tomorrow, 2 days before Norman's court hearing. The timing was deliberate. I wanted Beverly questioning everything when Norman stood before Judge Williams accepting his plea deal. Wanted her wondering about her financial future while her husband faced consequences for his violence. The courthouse was packed the morning of Norman's hearing. I arrived early and claimed a seat in the 3rd row. Perfect sightline to the defense table where Norman would sit. At 9:15, the courtroom door opened and Norman entered with his public defender and Beverly. He wore a suit that didn't fit properly, shoulders too wide, sleeves too long, borrowed from someone with different proportions. His tie sat crooked against his collar. He saw me immediately, and our eyes met across the formal space. His face flushed dark, jaw clenching visibly. Beverly touched his arm, whispered something, guided him to the defense table. He sat but kept glancing backward, unable to help himself. I remained motionless, silent, just existing as a reminder of consequences. The prosecutor, a young woman with a leather briefcase, conferred briefly with the public defender. Papers changed hands, the plea agreement already negotiated. Ready for judicial approval. All rise, the bailiff announced. Judge Williams entered, a man in his 50s, with graying temples and the efficient demeanor of someone who'd seen every permutation of human stupidity. The State of Arizona versus Norman Walsh, case number CR 2024-07428. Counsel, my understanding is we have a negotiated plea. The prosecutor stood. Yes, Your Honor. The state offers the following terms. Defendant pleads guilty to simple assault, receives 18 months supervised probation, fine of $2,500 payable within 60 days, completion of certified anger management program consisting of 26 weekly sessions, and 50 hours community service to be completed within 6 months. Judge Williams turned to Norman. Mr. Walsh, do you understand the charges against you? Yes. The word came out flat, mechanical. Are you entering this plea voluntarily, without coercion? Yes. Do you understand that by accepting this plea, you're admitting you committed assault against your father-in-law in his own home? Norman hesitated. His public defender leaned over, whispered urgently. Finally, yes. The judge slid papers across the bench. Sign here. Norman stared at the plea agreement like it was a death warrant. Then he picked up the pen and signed his name with enough force to tear the paper slightly. The court accepted Norman's guilty plea and sentenced him accordingly. Probation began immediately, with weekly check-ins required. But Norman couldn't leave well enough alone. As the hearing ended, he stood and turned toward me. This whole thing is ridiculous, he said loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear. It was an accident. He's sitting there watching like this is entertainment. He destroyed my life over nothing. Judge Williams' gavel slammed down twice. Mr. Walsh approached the bench. Now Norman's face went pale as he realized his mistake. The public defender grabbed his arm, but the damage was done. You just threatened the victim in open court, Judge Williams said, his voice ice cold. Your probation terms are now enhanced. Weekly in-person check-ins become mandatory. Any further violation, and I mean anything, including raised voices or indirect contact, results in immediate incarceration. Beverly sat frozen in her seat, watching her husband dig himself deeper. I remained motionless, letting Norman's character speak for itself. 6 weeks later, the inevitable happened. Norman's employer called him to HR for what he thought was routine paperwork. Instead, the manager slid termination papers across her desk. Our annual compliance review flagged your criminal record. Company policy prohibits employees with assault convictions from maintaining client-facing positions. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Norman tried to negotiate. I can transfer to internal operations, something without client contact. There are no available positions that meet those criteria. He signed the papers because refusing wouldn't change anything. Walked to his car with his personal items in a cardboard box, knowing background checks would kill every future application. That afternoon, Beverly called me. Her voice carried a tremor I recognized from when she was young and had done something she couldn't undo. Dad, things are really difficult. Norman lost his job because of the conviction. We're struggling financially. I was hoping maybe you could help us just temporarily until he finds something new. I set down my coffee cup carefully. Around me, other patrons at the outdoor cafe talked quietly while normal life continued. I'll help you, Beverly. One condition, file for divorce and move back home. Silence stretched between us. I could hear her breathing, rapid and shallow. You want me to leave my husband when he's struggling? What kind of father makes that demand? I'll help you, not him. There's a difference. You planned this, didn't you? Her voice climbed toward realization. You knew he'd lose his job. You knew we'd be desperate. I pressed charges after he assaulted me in my own home. Everything else came from his choices, not mine. She hung up without another word. What I didn't know was that Beverly had spent that morning staring at bills spread across their apartment counter like accusations. Rent, $1,400 probation fees. 40 weekly, anger management, $75 weekly, utilities, groceries, insurance. Her income covered maybe half their expenses. 2 weeks later, she was searching for tax documents when she found the retirement account statements in their filing cabinet. 4 months of withdrawals she'd never authorized. $12,500 gone while they lived rent-free in my house. She confronted Norman that evening. He tried to justify it: community property, household expenses, his legal fees. But Beverly had finally done the math. $12,500 stolen plus $32,000 in hidden debt. He'd been bleeding her dry while planning to inherit my house. She remembered my phone call, my conditional offer. File for divorce and come home. I'd known about the stolen money somehow, known about the debt, known about all of it. 10 days later, my phone rang while I sat on the back patio with morning coffee. "Dad, I'm coming home today. Can I come home today?" Her voice carried something I hadn't heard in months, certainty mixed with relief. Beverly had waited until Norman left for his probation check-in, then driven straight to her divorce attorney's office. Filed the petition that morning while he was gone. Irreconcilable differences, unauthorized use of marital funds, property division requested. She packed while he was out: clothes, laptop, family photos, her mother's jewelry. When Norman returned and saw the suitcases by the door, she handed him the divorce papers.
"I filed this morning. The marriage is over."
He tried to argue, to blame me, to promise he'd change. But Beverly was done listening to promises from a man who'd stolen from her while she slept. My doorbell rang 20 minutes later. Beverly stood there with tear tracks on her face and 2 suitcases at her feet. I stepped aside and held the door wide. "Welcome home." 3 weeks later, the final pieces fell into place. Beverly's divorce decree arrived, dissolution granted, effective immediately. My letter from the county clerk confirmed Norman's probation was complete, case file archived. Norman had moved to Nevada to live with his brother, starting over at 37 with nothing but debt and a criminal record. I didn't wish him harm. I simply didn't think about him at all. That evening, Beverly and I sat on the back patio with coffee, watching the sun set over the mountains. She'd repainted her old room soft blue, something that looks like hope. She'd said, "Dad, I'm sorry I didn't believe you at first. Sorry I chose him over you for so long." I took a sip of coffee, watched a car pass on the distant street. "You believed when you were ready. Nobody can be convinced of truth they're not prepared to see." She nodded, staring at the horizon where mountains met darkening sky. "Is it wrong that I feel relieved? Not angry, just free." "That's exactly right. Freedom is the point." The stars came out one by one as darkness settled. Beverly squeezed my hand briefly, simple gesture of gratitude and connection. We sat there as the sky filled with light, father and daughter safe at home, everything exactly as it should be. Norman had wanted to inherit my house so badly he could taste it. Instead, he'd guaranteed Beverly would lose everything if she stayed with him. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. Sometimes it's about protection. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be a victim in your own home. The house was quiet again. Peaceful mine, but shared now with my daughter who was building her own future instead of financing someone else's fantasies. And that was worth more than any revenge I could have planned. I learned that patience isn't weakness, it's preparation. And when you've spent 3 decades watching criminals destroy themselves, you know that giving someone enough rope is often the most effective strategy of all. The greatest victory wasn't putting Norman in jail or taking his job away. It was teaching my daughter that she deserved better than a man who saw her as a stepping stone to my grave.